Hi, I'm Yegi. I'm an entrepreneur and success coach who wants it all. Family, luxury, career, and the freedom to do whatever I want, whenever I want. And I'll do whatever it takes to get there. I created the Yegi Project to document my journey and inspire others to do the same. My mission is to change the world by influencing and leading others to do what they love and live fulfilled lives. Hello. Welcome back to the Yegi Project. Today's honored guest is Ari, who is a master of growth through adversity, positive mindset, and resilience. He has produced a 2-hour movie in 2 weeks and even brought a frog back to life. Please, Ari, without further ado, tell us, who are you and what do you do?
Thank you so much. It sounds like you found some of my newer materials, so I feel like I have to explain that a bit. But yeah, so my name's Ari Gunzburg. I am a coach, speaker, and writer. And what I focus on most is like recreating this concept of the power of possibility and the idea that we have so much capability within ourselves that if we're just able to bring it to the table on a daily basis, that we can really expand the possibility of what we're able to achieve. Right? Because if we can't conceive it in the mind, we can't create it in the world. About the frog, I mean, the movie, I think, we can definitely get into that if you want, but the frog, I'll give you the very brief story. When I was like 5-6 years old.
Icebreaker, take us back. What is this frog story about?
Yeah, I was like sitting there rewriting my bio, talking about the power of possibility, and I was like, the frog story is the perfect story. Like, it's true, it happened. And when you say it as brought a frog back to life, unfortunately, some people will be like, that's not possible, right? And then other people will be like, that sounds like an interesting story. I wonder what's going on over there. So when I was like 5, probably 6 years old or so, because I'm thinking of which house it happened in, I had a pet frog. And one day, I think maybe we came back from a trip, or like I was just being irresponsible. I was 6 years old and I had a pet frog, and we went to the cage and it was not moving. For all intents and purposes, it appeared as if it was dead. There's the key point that like actually turns this into a true story, not a made up one. And so we were like looking at it. My parents were convinced that it was dead because it didn't look like it was breathing. It didn't look like it was moving. It didn't look like it had any life left in it. And I was convinced that it was alive. They wanted to flush it. I did not. And so there was a little bit of an argument, and I was like holding on to like, no, it's alive. It's fine. It's alive. It's fine. And I think that we had one of those plastic kiddie pools in the backyard that had some water in it. And so like, I don't remember, I ran out to the pool and I was like, come here, like, just look, it's alive. And I put it into the pool.
Your instinct told you to do that. Yeah. You're like, let's give this frog another chance. Maybe he needs water.
Give it another chance. Yeah. And so because I think it was just very dehydrated, but not yet dead. So I put it into the water, and it kind of just floated there for a little bit. And I guess frogs must, get a lot of moisture in from their skin and not just from drinking. But like as the moisture got back into its body, and it was like went from being, I guess, dehydrated severely to not being dehydrated severely, all of a sudden it starts kicking and now it's swimming around the pool. My parents are like, will you look at that? And I'm like, it's back to life.
The magic of a young kid and its wishes. I believe in it. I really do believe the power of like mind and
just hold on to it up here.
Wanting something.
The one thing that's guaranteed, we can't always bring a dead pet back to life, right? That's hopefully is obvious to everybody that's listening. But I think the point there is that if you can't imagine that it's possible in your head, it will never be possible in the real world. And so that's this whole concept of the power of possibility and being like a mindset coach and an impact coach, is that we need to like do the work internally for ourselves and for what's going on in our lives to make sure that we believe that something is possible. Once we get there, everything becomes possible, because like, okay, the frog wasn't really dead, so we believe, but if we were just like, yeah, okay, I guess it's dead, flush it down the toilet, it would have gone down the toilet and that's it, done.
Yeah.
All about just like holding on to this concept of like, maybe this really is something that is possible, and let me go and do it. And once we believe it's possible, so much becomes available to us.
Oh, wow. Yes, I'm a huge believer of that. And literally anything from personal life to business, that scenario does apply and it has happened. And I've proved it true for myself in many cases. So I love that story. It was a good opener. All right. My next question to you is how did you get started into all of this? How did you start the coaching, training, and speaking?
Yeah, so the coaching and training is much more of an offshoot of the speaking. The speaking started when I was working with a business coach back like 2016, 2017 or so. Like there were two events that both happened right around the same time, and I didn't write it down, so I'm not clear which one happened exactly when, and it might have been like off by, they may have been spaced by a year or two. But anyways, I was working with a business coach because I wasn't exactly happy with the career that I was in, which was graphics and marketing, and I wanted to do something different. So at some point in time in our work together, he mentioned, I think it was him who mentioned it, that to be potentially go into speaking. And so I started exploring speaking, and and then around the same time I was invited to come in and speak to a bunch of juvenile delinquents that were currently locked up. My initial knee-jerk reaction was like, I do not want to go back in there, and I have a bit of a past and everything. So like I was like, nope, I don't want to go back in there, but I was like, I really can probably connect to them the best. So I initially declined. Then I came back and said, I'll actually do it because I realized I can actually connect to them better than anybody else that was on the roster to go in and speak to them for career day. The girl who had asked me, she's like, we're all set. We filled all the slots. You don't have to come in. I was like, yes. And then she responded a few hours later that somebody canceled and would I please take up the empty spot?
The universe was just telling you you were meant
Yeah,
to go and do this, no matter how much you tried to get out of it.
it was terrifying. Oh, this is back in 2016, and the only reason I know that year is because it was like a month before my daughter was born. So like this is back in 2016. I was freaking out. We're expecting our third kid, and just there was so much going on. And I was like, I guess I'll go in. And I stayed up the whole night, like writing down these note cards to like tell them my story. And then like a few hours before I went in, I was like, oh no, maybe they don't want to hear about my story. Maybe they just want the marketing. And I started having this imposter syndrome before I went into the gig, and then I showed up, and I was like, all right, look, guys. I realized that I had an option to like not assume that they wanted to hear my story, but give them the option. So I walked in and I said to the crowd of like 50 delinquents who were in the room, and I said, I can start with my story and tell you about some of the stuff that I've been through, which will have some similarities to things that you've been through. Or we can just jump straight into the marketing and the career and like, talk about how marketing is a potential career. And they're like, I was like, by show of hands, who wants to hear my story? And like almost everybody's hand went up. And so I started off with my story. It was for like 45 minutes or an hour. We did a marketing exercise for like 30 minutes. It was super cool. I hope valuable to them. It seemed like they were really interested and very engaged. And then we developed a product verbally, like we were just talking it out, right? What's it going to be called? What color is it? What type of product? And I was just having them like throw answers out and picking the ones that I liked. And after we finished, I sat there and made a little graphic of the product and I sent it over to the girl who worked in the place. So she printed out a few color copies of it and she put it up in their, they called it like house or whatever in their unit. And they were just like floored that I followed up, I guess, after I had left. I'd spent another few hours, putting together this representation of the exercise that we had done. And I guess they felt like, oh, I guess,
Wow, you
hopefully
care.
they hopefully they felt like that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Honestly, sometimes that's all a person needs is just that little hope that, hey, somebody cares about me and I have a
Connection.
chance.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
now I'm very curious. Since you shared your story with them, do you mind sharing a summary of your story with our audience?
Yeah. Without notes in front of me, it gets a little rough, but not rough, but like, I'll just kind of focus on the big points. I'm just like thinking of which thing to start with, but when I was 10 years old, when I was 10 years old, in fourth grade, I was on a field trip with a teacher. We were out hiking in the woods, and while we were hiking in the woods, he fell over.
Mm,
We ran for help. We came back. They took us out of the woods. They called our parents. They sent us home. So we found out later that day that he did not make it.
mm.
Basically, he was gone before he hit the ground, which was very traumatic. The school did not necessarily treat us the best after that as well. Maybe they did their best. I have friends who claim on good authority that they did not do their best. because they figured we're so messed up anyways. This was back in the 90s. It was much different back then. Like nowadays, there would have been massive amounts of therapy. They did try with the therapy briefly, but like they did not make a concerted effort, and they were doing it as a whole class together. It was not enough, and not and
Not effective.
it was not enough. It was not effective. The people they brought in were not trained well enough. Like it was just overall, it was just no good.
Well,
So
I'm
that,
sorry
yeah,
for what
thank
that's
you.
worth. That sucks. And
Yeah, it's
so many
really hard.
people. Yeah.
So the next couple years, they gave us two brand new teachers, which they're like two educational tracks in that school. So like in one of the educational tracks, they gave us a brand new teacher for fifth grade. They gave us a brand new teacher for sixth grade, who did their best, but they were brand new teachers and they didn't necessarily know what they're doing and how to sit there and support. So like it just took kids who were already in a hard place and put them into a worse place. Seventh grade, they had a major problem. And for one of the educational tracks, like they kept on losing teachers and finally got this one guy in. He was a disaster. Uh,
Mm,
like I asked a friend of mine a few years ago, I was like, "Oh, hey, what about that time in school with this teacher?" And he's like, "I blocked that whole part of my life out. Don't even talk to me about it." I'm like, "Whoa, I knew it was
and
bad, but I didn't realize it was that bad." I got suspended for a week at towards the end of the year, and after that was right before a holiday, and so I never went back after that. Like I got into major fights with my parents about going back with it into that. Um, and I ended up switching schools, and I ended up, getting involved with people who are still my friends, but we were all kind of heading in the wrong. A lot of us were heading in directions that were not so conducive to teenagers.
I mean, it happens so often when you
It
don't have
does.
good role models in school and
Yeah.
better focus, you know. That's why it's so unfortunate when our schools don't have as much support and funding. And, you know, you just wish teachers would be actual role models for kids. It's a whole other
Yeah.
issue we can have a podcast about, which I don't want to get into right now. But yeah, I mean, it's just a reality of it that we need to focus our efforts on the education system.
Yeah. There's a lot of areas that we kind of could focus on in making change, a valuable change for society and for the younger generation. Education, like you said, is just one of them, and there's so many different, so like
Hmm.
people could dedicate their lives to changing just one aspect of all of that, and if they make some tangible change, it will make a difference. But there's so much. We're to some degree with all of the new technology and the new ways that things are working and the new everything. It's just we're on a freight train barreling towards
No, it's
disaster.
overwhelming. When we think about all of it, it's very overwhelming. And I have three very young kids, so now,
Yeah.
my God, my kids are in trouble. But you know,
I'm fighting nonstop with my kids. Like they're like, I want a phone. And I'm like, no, you can't have a phone. You have a phone. No. All the kids in my class have a phone. No.
I know, but how long can you kind of hold them back from everything? It's so tricky to be a parent these days, and everything, parenting's so different also compared to how we were raised. So I don't know. My kids are still very young. I'm still trying to figure out my
How
methods.
old are they?
The oldest one is 4, so they
Oh,
still are
yeah, very young.
100% under my control. And there's three of them. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out how I want to raise them. Right now, my easiest solution is that I'm going to homeschool them and hopefully have the freedom of lifestyle with business to do so. But, you know, I could change my mind as things up.
Homeschooling, homeschooling as an idea is fantastic and amazing, but like you said, you need the freedom from the business in order to make to be able to happen. Because if you're trying to hold down a full time or more than
Oh,
full time
yeah.
job and homeschool, it's just oh man. I mean, as you know, like during COVID, everybody was forced to homeschool for a while,
Thank God I
and
didn't have
it
to deal
was
with that. But yeah, all
yeah,
my friends told me how horrible that
it
was.
was homeschooling by choice is amazing when you have the structure and the ability to sit there and set things up as you want them to. I'm not sure exactly why, but I wasn't able to get everything going the way that I would really want it to, and so it just ended up being a massive disaster and a massive not a disaster, but
I
it
think
wasn't
also it
great.
was probably thrown at people, at you. You know, you weren't
Yeah.
expecting to do this to prepare and plan and like set it up the way you was like, all right, now you're a
Right.
teacher
Now
and
you're a teacher,
like
yeah.
all this thing. So I could
It
only
was
imagine.
pretty interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, so like there's all these different areas that we could definitely improve upon, but we
Let's go
yeah,
back to your
go ahead.
story. Let's go back to your story of how everything led to you being who you are today and focusing your mission on bettering others through giving them the choice that, hey, you have the greatest potential. You just have to work your way there.
Find the way. Yeah. So as I mentioned, I went through a lot through when I was a teenager. A lot of it was an offshoot of the thing that happened when I was in fourth grade. A lot of it was an offshoot of being expelled. Parts of it were an offshoot of the kids that I started hanging out with. We kind of all went down a path together, and kids are impressionable, right? And so there was this weird situation in my town that like there was a bunch of groups of kids who had all dropped out, that there were these organizations that were trying to support them, and they're
Mm.
like, we'll do anything. Basically, they were kind of like, we'll do anything you want, just, be part of our program. And these
Oh,
kids like literally abused the adults that were around them. Like, but the adults were like, we just want you to be a part of this. But they were giving them all sorts of stuff. They were giving them trips, they were giving them prizes, they were giving them like everything. And so like it gets to a point where you're like, if you're like in the system like this, and you see all the kids who are not in the system not doing the right stuff, and they're getting rewarded for not doing the right stuff,
yeah, it throws you off.
where do you go? Do I go here where there's no reward, or here where there is a reward? And so I ended up kind of like shooting down that path and everything, which there's different ways and directions and ways of thinking of it. So fast forward a few years, I went through a lot of stuff over those years. In my early 20s, I ended up in a house with a bunch of people from, a bunch of foreigners. And so American culture is one thing and wonderful, but like when you have like a more of a Eurasian culture, it's very different. And so sometimes that can be healthy for somebody who's coming from a very Americanized culture to see such a diverse or a different way of living and being and acting and all sorts of other things. They were all significantly older than I was, and all of them had kind of like straightened out that part of their lives. And so that I think had a very positive effect on me. I don't know if they
Oh, good.
realize how much of a positive effect it had on me, but it did have overall positive effect on me. A number of years later, I got married and everything, and then I'm sitting there and I'm like, basically, I'm like, I can't tell anybody about my past. I don't want people to know the stuff that I went through. I don't want people to know that I did this, and I don't want people to know about that. I don't want anybody to know about it.
Yeah,
And
you felt
then,
like
and
you were
then,
gonna be judged or labeled
yeah,
some
I
way.
have to hide it, and I can't use it. And then this thing happened with the juvenile delinquents, and I was like, oh wait, I can actually,
Help
if I'm
people.
willing to be honest about the stuff that I went through, which of course there's always going to be the people out there who are going to judge, and they're not the people that we're here for.
No.
uh but like if I'm willing to be honest and bare my soul essentially, and like open up about what I've went through, there's really people that I can help in a big way, and that I can like kind of hopefully help them not make the same mistakes that I did, or if they're making the mistakes that I did, bring them back earlier, or be there to better support them and to be
Influence
like the
them.
person, yeah, influence them to be the person who
Even,
like, I've been through this.
yeah, you probably have no idea how many people you're touching with this podcast, because so many people could be going through so many personal things that they might
Yeah,
think it's not
absolutely.
worth to talk about, to bring up, and they're the problem. But hearing somebody else's story helps us first relate and feel like we're not alone. Everybody goes through some sort of trauma. Hopefully not, but I've come to learn that everybody has some sort of trauma, and it's so nice to have people you could relate to and learn from. So thank you
I
so much for going deep and sharing your story, because I could only
Absolutely.
imagine how difficult it is. Like
Yeah,
it's hard.
it is hard, but you mentioned everybody has some type of trauma. I heard something from somebody I know who went from being a principal of a school to being a social worker. And he said something fascinating when I saw, and this is years ago already, I heard this. He said that one of the most important things that he learned when he was going through school was, my trauma and your trauma are not necessarily the same thing, but that doesn't make another person's trauma any less traumatic, right? If somebody goes through something and they felt that it was traumatic, it was a traumatic incident for them, period.
Yeah, it
And
doesn't
so
have to
like,
be compared.
so sometimes when we're like, it wasn't a death, or it wasn't a this, or it wasn't a that, or it wasn't a whatever, or like we can sit there and be like, oh well, it was nothing compared to, right? I mean, I'm not saying this, but like people could be like, it was nothing compared to what I went through. And it's like, you don't have the strengths, and you don't have the weaknesses, and you don't have the experiences, and you don't have, so we can't compare like and be like, that's not a traumatic experience. No, no, no. If somebody felt like it was a traumatic experience in their own life, it was a
It
traumatic
was, yeah.
experience. And how do we address that, and how do we move past it, and how do we come to terms with it, and how do we accept it, and how do we forgive it, and how do we move past it,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, I think that comparing comment applies to so many things. I think we all need to learn to not compare in any area. I think a lot of people do it in trauma, then they feel like they're more of a victim because they went through worse things in their head. But like you said, my worst thing could be your like super worst thing, and it could be the same thing, but we all treat it differently. And then we compare in business, or somebody's doing better than me, somebody's putting more effort, and then we go through this loophole. But we all have to remember, right? We're all different and we all have our own stories, our own voice, and we contribute in our way. And I always tell everybody we all have our path, and it doesn't, if we both have the same destination we want to go to, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to take the same path. So anyways, going back into actually your interview before we got so deep into the story, I'm very curious. How did you even start shifting from graphic design and marketing to the motivational coaching and speaking? Because that's also a major career change, and I know it's not 100% stable. Like you don't have a 9 to 5 with your gig, or correct me if I'm wrong. But how was that transition? And what gave you kind of the peace to jump and make your dream come true?
So, well, I started off the journey. I was like listening to stuff, and people kept on mentioning Toastmasters, like Les Brown and all the greats always mention Toastmasters. I don't know if Toastmasters now is what it was. I know that they were making changes that I did not agree with. I reached out to leadership a number of times to sit there and be like, I'm not sure that you're making the right choices. And they were like, no, we're set on it. So I said, I'm going to vote with my feet and walk away. And I think a lot of people did also. Toastmasters
Mm.
membership, I think, is way, way, way down than it was when I was there.
I don't
But
know how it's changed, but I was also a part of it back in like 2015, 16,
yeah, it was
and it
after
was
that.
great. I don't know what
It
happened
was after that.
after. It was after
Yeah,
that.
no, it was after that. They tried to go digital. They tried to this. They tried to that. People were not happy, and they did not like the changes. And it was a big shift, and a
Mm.
lot of people didn't like it. And I know a lot of people left. They may have been building back up, and people might like the program now. I'm not sure,
Yeah, after
but
COVID, things, a lot of businesses lost their vision.
it was before COVID,
Oh,
but
it
it was
was
still pretty
before.
bad.
Okay, we're just gonna table that.
Yeah, no, no. So anyway, so Toastmasters was incredibly helpful for me. It sounds like it was incredibly helpful for you also.
Yes.
If anybody's listening to this and they're wondering how they can make sure that Toastmasters is helpful even with the changes, feel free to reach out to me and we can have a brief conversation where I'll be like, here's what it used to be like, here's what it is like now, here's how to use it to sit there and get the benefits that we're talking about. Moving on. Yeah, so I started going to Toastmasters meetings. I started like doing everything I could to get on stage, and that might mean in front of like 5 people. So I was talking like I joined a club that was pretty small, and like there was always a speaking slot open. So I was speaking every single week. I was joining every contest that I could possibly join. I was like immersing myself in this concept of speaking, not up to the part of speaking for money yet, just in the part of speaking. Then I started shifting into like, trying to make money with it, and I started building it up, and I was still doing all of the marketing stuff that I was doing before. Seemed like I was really getting to a good place around the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. I was like, this is it. I've got it made. I'm going to go for it. can't I shut everything down with my graphic design business in like January or something. I was like, let's go. And then the speaking business went kaput, as you know, in March of 2020. So I had to shift a little bit. I had to make some transitions. I had to go back to the graphic design at some point during COVID, get jobs and do other things, the whole time during COVID. And then the beginning of 2022, I was like, let's make this happen and let's make this happen for real. And so I went straight back into the speaking thing. And because 2022, there were parts of the country that were open, and a lot of people that wanted to have live events were traveling to the parts of the country that were open. So that's what my strategy was. I just kind of like
Nice.
shifted around and went to the places where they were much more available for live events, and then slowly but surely everybody started jumping into it as well. Um, and yeah, I mean that's been the basic journey and everything. So it's been pretty cool. It's been a bit of a ride. Like you said, it's not a steady thing. It's got its roller coaster parts of it and everything, like most sales oriented jobs, but It is what it is,
Yes,
you know?
I think that's what I've learned to accept. It's in seasons. You know, you hear that term, but when everything's always going great and upwards, you're like, "Ah, I don't know what this means. I just want to keep growing." And then the first time you notice a drop in your business or in any project you're working on, then you're like, "Oh my God, this is what they mean by seasons." Embrace it, you know, use this time to re-strategize or pivot or do all these other
Absolutely.
things. But I think that's been the most calming or peaceful thing I've heard is the seasons that everybody, everything, every business has seasons, just like the world. So embrace the bad times, good times will come again. We just are getting stronger with the bad
Absolutely.
times. All right, so let me dive into just a fun, interesting question I like to ask my audience. Oh, sorry, not my audience, my guests. If you can change one thing with a magic wand, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Whew, I have no
Don't
idea. I don't know.
overthink it. It
There's
could be anything.
no, I mean, like it's just scuba diving earlier. Only just got into scuba diving a couple years ago. It would be nice to
Okay.
have done it 25 years ago or something, and just have been doing it for so long. That's all.
That's actually something on my bucket list that I've never done. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
interesting to see why is that life changing for you that you wish you've done it sooner?
It's just it's an opportunity to go into an alien world where you're not really going that far, right? You don't have to jump in a spaceship and go. It does take time, it does take money, it does take effort, but you don't have, in LA, like you can go diving in San Diego year round and it's just a few hours away from you. Does that mean that the water's warm? No.
Like San
I've been
Diego,
there.
not only like,
I've been diving in San Diego in January and everything. It's cold, but like with a 7 mil wetsuit, it's not that bad.
okay. Where there's a will, there's a way, like you said, right? It's not, nothing's impossible.
Even further up north in the Pacific Northwest, right? I'm meaning just sticking to your coastline. People go diving all year round. I think all year round using dry suits, which is a whole nother thing, but that's not the point. A guy that I told to go, I've urged people to go scuba diving since I've gotten certified, and one guy in particular, he's having like a bit of, I don't know the best way to put it, maybe like a failure launch and difficulty and like all this other stuff, and he's trying to figure it out. And so he went scuba diving one time. Like he was like, I got to get away from everything up north. He lived on the Northeast. He's like, I come down to Florida. He's down to Florida. He's like talking to me. He's like, what should I do? And I'm like, I would love to take you. I can't take you right now. Go scuba diving. So he drove up to a guy that I know and I set him up with, and he went up and the guy took him scuba diving, and he calls me up that night. I was like in an airport or something in the middle of traveling, and he calls me up. He's like, my life just changed. He's
Wow.
like, on the surface, everything's all over the place, and I've got this going on, that, all these things going on in my head, and I got into the water, and there was nothing, quiet. And I
Mm,
realized that all I have to do is I have to sit there and work on my buoyancy in life, because that's something you work in scuba diving, is to not like bounce up and down your buoyancy,
mhm.
to try and be level. He's like, I realize that I'm bouncing too much in life, and I got to sit there and stop bouncing so much in life, and I got to try and be a little bit more even keel, a little bit more buoyant. I'm like, yeah.
Wow.
Whole
I
coaching
love it.
session, I didn't even say a word. I'm like, yeah, that's it.
There you go. Awesome. All right. So, can you tell our audience and listeners what's the top three things you've noticed in your coaching or speaking gigs that is almost like eye-opening, that like aha moments for people? Three top piece of advice.
That we have far more strength than we ever believe in. That a shifted mindset can create a shifted outcome. Like a better mindset can create a better outcome. I'm just like, there's so many things running through the head. I'm just trying to think of like one. To know what you're all about changes everything that you do, and where you're going.
So, if I were to ask you that question, what are you all about? What would your short answer be?
Doing everything I can to be a great dad. That's the
I
number one.
love
And then
that.
everything else comes off of that, and everything, to help the people around me, to help make a positive change in the world and everything like that. But like the number one is the dad part.
What has been your biggest challenge in life or business so far, and what have you done to overcome it? Or are you still doing to overcome it?
The ups and downs, probably, like we all have times where you feel like you're on top of the world, and you have times where you feel very much the opposite of being on top of the world. And being able to weather the downs as well as you're able to weather the ups is it's a big challenge, and one that I constantly am working on. As I've told people in the past, like, it's a muscle that we work, right? So I've
Yeah.
done a lot of long distance endurance events, right? Both that were organized or stuff that I just kind of challenged myself to do for no reason. And it all comes down to having that persistence and that resilience to get through to the very end. But we still have those moments, both figuratively and literally, when we're like, I don't know how I'm going to make it to the finish line.
Oh yeah, and I could relate. I think a lot of entrepreneurs especially can relate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you for sharing that. A lot of people, kind of hold that back because they want to sound like they got everything figured out. But that's
I'm
not the
human just like
reality of
you.
it. Yes. Now, let's say we were following you around for a day or a week. I know our schedules can be all over the place depending on the day of the week. What does a typical day or morning routines, night routines look like for you that keep you going?
Yeah, so it shifts constantly because I'm like a lot of times traveling and on the road, and so I just have to be very, very, very flexible. But
And this
morning
is
always,
for the speaking gigs?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So morning always starts with lots of coffee.
How old are your kids, if you don't mind me asking? I'm just curious.
13 and under.
Okay, yeah, they're still all
Yeah,
very young.
pretty
They
young. Yeah,
need you a lot.
so if I'm at home, it's lots of coffee, getting the kids off to school, focusing on the marketing aspect of the business and the sales aspect of the business, running my team, checking in with everybody, going through the different, is this working like we were talking before, the progressive tweaking to sit there and make sure that things are working the way that they need to work. Depending on what meetings that I have that day, right? Obviously, arranging everything according to those meetings so I can make those meetings be on time and be fully present for those meetings. And towards the end, later part of the day, the kids get home and it's time to do it all over. Get the kid, hang out with the kids, get this dinner, get them to bed, and do it all again.
Do you have any specific routines or kind of like tools that keep you going? Like, I guess the motivation aspect of it. What I'm trying to ask is a lot of times we talked about, like, I may not feel like my best or doing X, Y, and Z for myself or my business. What tools do you use to stay motivated and inspired to keep going?
So what's worked really well for me in the past, and it's not currently working for me because I'm not doing it, is like a good exercise routine. So like if you have like a good exercise class, or if you can do an early morning type of exercise like biking or running or anything like that, that usually will start the day off right. Was planning on getting back into an exercise routine very strongly after like a personal holiday that I just took that just ended. However, I recently got injured, and so it seems like I'm gonna have to.
Oh,
I have to
no,
figure
I'm
out how to
sorry.
do it. Yeah, I was on my way to a speaking gig, and I was parked in a car all the way on the shoulder, and somebody decided to drive into me.
Oh
So
my God. Out
I
of
know,
nowhere.
I don't know. Like I was sitting there on the phone, and I'm like, what? Like I don't even know what happened. What just happened? Like I didn't even know what happened. The car started telling me I was in an accident. My phone started telling me I was in an accident. I was like, I don't even know what's happening right
Oh
now.
my
It was
God,
pretty bad.
I'm sorry. That sucks. I hate those things, but it is what it is, right? You gotta find a different way to exercise.
Yeah, so I'm working with a chiropractor now, trying to figure out my shoulders, my neck, what's going on. I probably like my legs seem to be my legs and the hips and everything like that, so I'll probably still be able to do like a lot of walking and stuff like that. But whereas I would usually try and get immediately into bringing the arms into it and yoga and all sorts of stuff like that, it's gonna be a little while before I actually get to do things like that. So I gotta just make adjustments. I'm contemplating joining the exercise classes I was going to join anyways, and just going to the teacher beforehand and being like, just so you know, if you can make me
Yeah,
like
these are my injuries.
every single time you tell me to do something with my arms, if you could just tell me to do something else that I can just not aggravate my arm too bad or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, there was a time where I wasn't allowed to work out because of the pregnancy kids and all of that. And it just kind of forced me to get into meditation to because
Yeah.
I used for with running and exercise, that's the state I would get into. I would get into this like badass mode of I'm unstoppable. I got this. It would just motivate me and I would feel really good. And it hit me hard when I couldn't do it. And I had my kids
Oh,
back to back. So for like four or
yeah.
5 years, I couldn't work out. And then that's kind of what it forced me to get into. And I found kind of my like that same feeling from meditation. So I thought I'd share in case
No, I use meditation.
you do. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm very cerebral, so like I really need to like get my body moving, and usually to like push it
I
like really, really
know.
hard. And when I can't, I go stir crazy, and I'm just it doesn't I don't connect mind body like I usually do, and so then I'm stuck in my mind, very cerebral, and yeah.
I could relate. I totally could relate. Honestly, it sucks, but
Yeah.
take your time, heal. Heal
Yeah.
before you do that.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Now, before we come to a close, I always like to ask, where can people find you? How can they get in touch with you? And what are your last words of encouragement?
Yeah, so the best way to get in touch with me is just to remember Ari Guns. It's my first name and the first part of my last name, ARIGUNZ. So that's ariguns.com. On Instagram, it's at Ari Guns, and on LinkedIn, it's also at Ari Guns. So if you just remember that those words, Ari Guns with a Z, that's the best way to get in touch with me. Last words of encouragement, just hold on to hope. It's life is a constant up and down. And so, right, sometimes when we're on that down spot or the down spiral or anything like that, and we're in those places that seem difficult or seem hard, or nobody knows what's happening with the future, and it's looking like all sorts of things are going on with the world and all these other things. But like when we're in that down spot, just hold on to hope because it will get better. And I know it'll get better because it's constantly that up and down motion that the life is going through.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for those words of encouragement. And thank
Absolutely.
you to our audience and our listeners for tuning in. And until next week, have a great day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Ari, so much. Thank you for listening. Please rate and review this podcast. Follow and engage with us on social media under the Yegi Project. And if you're interested in being a guest, email info@theyegiproject.com. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes.